Is finance special? No. Is marketing special? No. Is sales special? No. Well, customer success is not special anymore. So we need to just get over that, right? Um, but it's a management practice, and that means it's about people, it's about process, it's about systems, it's about it's those three things: people, process, systems.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I am your host Chandni, and we're really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and technology experts from all around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO magazine, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 4 lakh visitors annually. And now for our guest, Peter Lyon is the Vice President for Customer Success at Poppulo and the co founder of Customer Success Network. He's currently focused on scaling SaaS businesses and customer success to the global market. His experience allows him to see issues from a strategic perspective, but communicate what needs to be done in a simple, easy way that can be followed. His passion is to enable teams to succeed in delivering successful outcomes to customers and to optimize operations for excellence. Welcome to the show, Peter. We're excited to talk to you today.
Hi, Shandani. How are you? Great to see you.
Same here. But before we dive into our interview with Peter, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap on the bell icon below to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders around the globe. Once again, welcome to the show, Peter, and thank you so much for giving us your time. So,
No worries. Listen, it's always good to share. I think in the world we live in, particularly in the last year, and also going forward, sharing knowledge and talking to peers is a great way to learn. It's a great way to keep moving forward.
absolutely. So, beginning with the first question, Peter, how do we embed a customer first mentality into the company culture?
Okay. Look, that's a question that I think many companies ask them themselves. And if you think about culture, it's one of those words that people tend to talk a lot about. It's like strategy. Everything is strategic. Culture. We must have a strong culture. And I think that there's probably three or four ways in my experience anyway, that you must do in order to ensure that you are embedding the right culture. And the first thing, which I think everyone will agree to, is got to come from the top. So the CEO, he or she must live and behave by the values that drive that particular culture. And then there's the leadership team. They've also got to subscribe to the values of the company that are enabling that culture to actually to foster and to grow. And then the other thing then is that the reward systems have got to support that, right? So if you have reward systems that are almost that they're fighting against some of the values, right? So if you're paying, I don't know, let's take a controversial subject. If you're paying your customer success managers commission on upsells and commission on renewals, then do you really are you driving the right type of be behavior? But if that's the behavior you want, then that's fine. But then that will give you a particular culture. But if that's the culture that you want, then that's okay, right? So there's no such thing as a good or a bad culture. It's the culture that you actually, if you're purposefully fueling that culture, then that's what you want, right? Now, whether you succeed with that culture is a different matter, right? And the third one is that it must be measurable. So how do you measure culture? Now you can get outside firms to come in and do employee engagement surveys and customer surveys, and they can be independent to validate, are you driving the right culture? So you may think, oh, we're really customer centric, But what happens is that maybe your renewals team, right, are not giving the customers some con- concessions. Maybe the renewals teams are not listening, and they're not passing some of the feedback into support or into products and so on. So how do we set up all of these different metrics and so on to make sure that we're actually doing the right thing? So I think that's really, really important. And then the other thing then is, once you're able to measure it, is then to constantly work at it. The culture is not something, you don't reach an end point. You don't wake up on a Monday and say, great, we're now completely customer centric, right? Because you won't be, because there will be some part of your company that has lost its way, has lost its compass, lost its north star, or you've put targets on that particular team that has an unintended consequence of setting the wrong behaviors, and therefore, because the behaviors will drive the culture, right? So therefore you end up with a pocket somewhere. And and we often get that, right? And if you look at sort of the responses, which we'll probably talk about later on, from an NPS survey, right? I'm not sure what it is for your company, but for my company, it's very, very standard that, we're very happy with our NPS score. But what we see is that there's always a cohort to say your software is the best ever. It's so easy to use. But then you get another cohort to say your software is the worst ever. We just can't use it. And you're kind of going, well, hang on, how could this be, right? And again, it might well be that somebody said something, in during the support or during the onboarding or whatever, that customer didn't like. So look, I think it's again, it's just very, very important that you constantly measure your culture, and then you also get the reward systems. But again, it must come from the top. If it's not coming from the top, then you're not going to have that in culture that you aspire to embedded throughout your company.
Absolutely. When you talk about measuring, I think it becomes very important to measure because a lot of time companies, take up things to improve the customer, to improve the whole culture, and then they don't really measure whether it's working for them or it is not working, and they just keep on doing it, and that's wrong. And
Uh,
absolutely, where you said, measurement is very important.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, over the past year, as we've seen with COVID and a lot of people switching to hybrid or completely working from home, and I know that depends upon the geography, lots of different lockdowns, variations of lockdowns, and so on. But nevertheless, if we go with the concept that, if you think about how culture itself breeds and how it manifests itself, a lot of this is informal conversations by the water cooler. It's being able to bring your team together and to collaborate on a particular issue. And let's face it, remote working is great for some people. It's awful for other people, right? Because for an introvert, home working is the best thing ever. For an extrovert, it's the worst thing ever, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, but you know but it's that coming together as people around a common problem, and we're in the same building, and so on, that also fosters culture. Now, if that's taken away, if that isn't there, so now what do you have? So what people need to be very mindful of is that your culture is going to be affected by a sudden shift to home working. And not only that, but your customers are also home working. So now everyone's stressed, right? We're stressed, the customers are stressed, right? And so how the company responds to that for its employees and its customers is really important, because that also will define the culture, right? So companies are now being tested on how real your culture is. A very good example of that is that I now know with my team what their personal home circumstances are. I didn't know that before COVID,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
So now I know that maybe Tom and Mary struggle to get a childminder. And so I won't set up a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, because that's the worst time for them, right?
Correct.
So it's being empathetic. It's sort of understanding now that as employers, we need to change how we treat our employees. And there was a great article I saw recently. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the author, but it was around. It was a colleague of mine who actually told me about it. Um, that is this the time that we're really going to shift to outcomes rather than input, right? So let's not talk about the hours worked, but let's talk about the outcomes. So we need this to be achieved by the end of the week. Fine, I will get it done by the end of the week. If you can get that done in 3 hours, great. If it takes you 6 hours, great. I don't care if it takes you Monday, Tuesday. Just get it done, right? And that's where we listen, and then that again drives the culture, right? That the employer is listening and we're engaging and we're understanding, and that's hugely important.
And I think it becomes very important to treat your employees right also, because employees are also your stakeholders at the end of the day. And the better you treat them, I think the better service they can provide to your customers ahead. It's absolutely well said.
100%. Like if you think about you know, we want to foster a culture of transparency, and we want to make sure that people understand what the strategy of the company is. Now, if you think about that, if everyone really understands that what the strategy is, what the technology roadmap, everyone involved in software is just obsessed with technology roadmaps, right? And our customers are always saying, "What's your roadmap? What's your roadmap?" Right? So if you're not communicating that strong enough, then your customer success managers, your customer facing staff, they don't know what it is. So how can they tell the customer what it is? So when the customer is also going, well, no one ever tells me from company X where you're going. So I don't know where you're going, but I know where I'm going. So if you can, again, this comes back to the culture that if we say we will talk openly, we will tell people where we're going, and that creates a culture of openness and transparency and honesty with the customer, right? And now you're having a very open relationship. If you think about all your personal relationships that you have in your life, you wouldn't have many if you weren't honest with your friends. So why customers are exactly the same because they're people too. They're not this sort of cold bean. They're people, and they have jobs to do too.
Correct. Absolutely well said, Peter. So, moving on to our next question, what do you think are the main pillars of customer success?
That's a great question. I mean, look. When we think about customer success, there are so many different interpretations of it, right? And depending on where you are as a company, will depend. That will drive how you're structured, how you approach it. But let's talk about when you're past the startup phase, when you're post startup, and you're getting ready to sort of ramp up. So what are the things that I think that someone should be thinking about? So I'm going to take the word success, right? So if you take that word and we take the first letter of S, and that's strategy, right? The first thing is you have to have a strategy, right? And that strategy for CS has to be linked to the business goals. It can't be some fluffy pie in the sky thing and let's make all customers happy. No, 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 no. If you're a leader of a CS function, your job is not to make customers happy. Making customers happy is an outcome to what your strategy is. But I've known loads of happy customers who have churned. So it's about successful customers, obviously. But to go back to the strategy part, that your CS strategy has to be aligned to the business goals. And so you have to know what those business goals are. Are we looking to exit the business soon? Are we looking to sell the business? Are we looking to get 20% overall growth? In which case, what's the contribution to the renewals to that overall growth? All right. We're moving from mid market into the enterprise. So, what are the strategic moves that we need to make in CS to transform ourselves to be ready and to be enabled to support larger enterprise, more complex customers. So you have to have a strategy, and that strategy should not be what we're going to do next quarter. It's going to be where do we want to be in 12 months' time? Where do we want to be in 18 months' time? If you take the U for understanding, right, you've got to have a clear understanding of two things: your industry and your product, right? So if you don't understand the drivers of what's happening, the industry that you're setting to, it's very hard to have that conversation with them, with those customers. It's very hard to show empathy for what's going on. But equally so, you've also got to understand what's going on in that particular customer's company. Are they doing redundancies? Are they expanding? Are they merging? Right? I'm always amazed by some people who don't know what's going on in their customers. Like it's just fundamental because that will drive the behavior of your key contacts. And so you've got to understand the pressures that they're under because you've got to be searching for those outcomes, right? The first C is culture, which we've spoken about. So you got to have that right sort of culture, right? And you need to, if that culture isn't there, or you feel the top is not driving the right culture, then you need to fight that culture, right? You need to ensure that that culture is actually going to be instilled. The second C is customer outcomes. Now, if we're all in customer success, we know it's all about the outcomes, right? And that's absolutely sure. But how do you get to that? And so you need to have differentiated playbooks for how you're going to get to that customer outcome. And let me give you an example of that, right? So at Poppulo, we recently changed how we're going to approach the whole onboarding side as we were moving into more complex, larger customers. So we split it up into two. So we have the implementation track and we have what we call the customer success session track. And that's where we separate out. So we let all the technical people get into a room virtually now and talk about how to get the system live and up and running and all the technical stuff. So we took the CSM away from that conversation and got the CSM and the salesperson to talk purely about what does success look like, what is and to really challenge the customer about what success like. I mean, it was one I remember many years ago in a different company. A customer said, "Success for me means that all my end users call you and not me." And we were kind of going, no. We want to know business. We want to know how is this. He said, and they said, no. That's it. And we thought about it. We thought, well, actually, do you know what? If that's what success looks like, then let's just make sure that first of all that happens, right? And that's what we did, and then we grew from there. In other words, I think sometimes we do get caught up and we want to walk away with a big folder of strategic outcomes that we're going to get from our customers. So sometimes you need to, but sometimes you also just need to have one. Just keep it simple, right? And of course, you've also got the other side where what if the person you're talking to doesn't know what success looks like because somebody else bought the software for them, right? And that's always a challenge. Um, the E is engagement, so employee engagement and customer engagement. That's hugely important. Employee engagement, which we touched on earlier on, and that's just looking after your people. I have this thing that we always talk about the customer journey, right? Everyone has a customer journey map, right?
Yes.
But how many people have got the employee journey? Have we mapped out the employee journey? And the employee journey has to be congruent with the customer journey. So there's no point in saying, right, this is the journey we want our customers to go on, which is wrong in the first place. This is the journey that our customers typically go on and how we need to support that. But how have we given our people the right skills? So going back to my earlier point, how many people get industry training? Most of us get technology training. Here you go. We're going to teach you how to use Salesforce, how to use all these different tech, how to use Pendo, Mixpanel, how to use Engati, all these sort of things. But does anyone say, right, here are the top 5 reasons why insurance companies operate in this way. Here's the top 5 reasons why manufacturing companies operate, right? So we've got to arm our CSMs with the right skills. And that's about engagement, right? And with the customers, it's the same thing. Without the former, it's hard to do the latter. Because if you think about it, if all you know as a CSM is your product, but you don't know about the industry that your customers in and the challenges they face, then all you're ever going to talk about is features, because that's where you're comfortable. And so if you're only ever talking about features, you're never going to talk about outcomes. So that's important. The first S is a structure. So you got to get your structure right, and structure. People tend to do things wrong. They tend to look at their people and then say, right, what am I going to get all these people doing? So what will I get Bob doing? What will I get Mary doing? Right? No, it's about what's the right sort of structure that you need to drive your business goals, right? And then what sort of model will you have? So will you go for the land, expand, and CSM model? Will you go for a land and a CSM model? So the CSM does the upsells, the cross sells, and the renewals, and the training, and everything else, right? So how are you going to structure? And then that comes back to what I said earlier on about the reward systems and about the behavior. So you got to think about your long-term structure. And sometimes you might want to get to a point where, okay, here's my structure today, but in a year's time, my structure will have to change to suit either scale, growth, because that, we all know, and to go back to my earlier point, that if a lot of companies, when they get to about 50 people and they get to about 2 million ARR, they suddenly look and they see that the CSM does the onboarding, the training, the QBRs, the renewals, everything. But that's not sustainable, because as your company grows, right, complexity comes in, right? So you need people to focus on just the renewals because there's so many of them. And it's all about process, 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 right? So you got to almost build that blueprint and think ahead. And the last S is success, and particularly around metrics. So what are these success metrics that you're going to use, right? And they're going to be different. If you if you did a Google on success metrics, you're just going to get a deluge of just so many things. And I think some people just make it overly complicated. There's a set of metrics that a VC or an investor would be looking at. And I just think that people internally should never ever look at those metrics. Right? Just keep them absolutely simple. Right? Right? They've got to be very, very simple. And you've got to understand your lag and your lead success metrics. And they're absolutely critical. And look, and they could be anything from simple, what's the renewal rate, right? And then you might want to segment, right, your customers. As the customers grow, you get more and more customers. Okay, what's the renewal rate for this segment? What's the renewal rate for this segment? So now that allows us to do some analysis. Other sort of simple lead metrics might be the customer has bought 1,000 licenses. They've enabled 850, but only 700 are actually using it. So that's one could argue that's a lag and a lead, but it tells you something. First of all, it tells you, okay, there's about 300 licenses that are not being used here. So when the renewal comes, there's more than likely going to be a downsell. But I suspect that not most, certain people are afraid to call the customer up and say, oh, did you know you've got 300 licenses that you're not using? Don't tell them that, because if you do, then they're going to downsell. Well, they're going to downsell anyway. And also, you're not treating the customer with respect. You're assuming that they're not very professional, right?
Correct.
So I think but that's where one of those metrics where you go in and you say, how do we get 300 people using it? Work with me on this, because the customer will have a boss. And if they go to their boss and say, well, I bought 1,000, but I only needed 700, well, that's a waste of money, right? So you get my point. So that's what I say. So strategy, understanding, culture, customer outcomes, engagement, structure, and success metrics. They would be my seven sort of pillars that you should look at.
Absolutely amazing. And as you started by saying that, we all have different perceptions about success, your pillars make it more streamlined and, more easy to understand. And I think the audience will really, really, it will be really great for them to know this. So, lastly, when we spoke about matrix, uh, how do you, how should we evaluate satisfaction with customers? And in order to do the same, what are the qualitative and quantitative metrics that teams need to track?
I think that there's two broad categories here, right? There's lots, but there's two broad ones. And if you think about your engagement strategy with your customers, so and typically you're going to have typically people put them into three categories: low touch or tech touch, as it's called, medium touch, and high touch, right? So it's I guess, to sort of capture the quantitative and the qualitative. If you have a high touch only model, then that's somewhat easier because you're having a conversation with your customers the whole time. And it's probably about five of you and about 10 of them, right? Okay. If it's a high touch, you're talking big enterprise, they're going to have 16 solution architects on their side, project managers, business analysts, and you're going to have that ongoing conversation. There's lots of things going on. Now you can bring in, some degree of surveys and forms and so on, but by and large, a lot of the feedback that you're going to get in a high touch, large enterprise is going to be face to face, right? Because you're also probably engaging in multi-year contracts, 2 year, 3 year contracts, right? So, and all that feedback and everything else is coming from your QBRs or your EBRs, right? So you're going to have those quarterly meetings, right? And then you can augment some of that with the medium and the tech touch sort of surveys, NPS, CSATs, and so on. So I remember coming across this many years ago at one of the conferences, the Customer Success Network conferences, and it was talking about creating a customer listening framework. So if you think about that, you think about all the different touch points, right, that you would have with a customer. Now, it might be with all customers. So you are going to have your post implementation um, survey. There's one point. Over here, you might have your ongoing. So that's a one off, right? And that gives you some barometer or some tone for how the relationship might move forward. So if it was a really complicated and painful implementation, you're now setting so the tone of the relationship and how people may feel about your product isn't great, right? So you need to have these multiple touch points along the journey now to sort of make sure that the corrective action you're taking is offsetting that. Yeah, look, it took us 6 months longer than we anticipated, but it's really good. We can see the benefits from it now. And that's where you want to get to. So outside of the implementation, then you got your CSATs every time there's a support call. You've got your regular NPS, and then you're going to have your QBRs. You're going to have your EBRs. You're going to have feedback from, let's say they upsell, and you also do a feedback. Well, how did that sales process go for you? Did we actually listen to you? Do you feel that we did listen to you? So you identify all the different touch points and you put that all together. Now this costs money because this means because you have to have people and systems, right? But I do think that it's worthwhile doing. At least if you start off with your framework, then you can build on that. But I think if you come back to it again, like customer satisfaction is probably down to two main things: your product and your customer service, right? That's down to a few other things, but broadly, it's those two things, right? Now, it is a balance. If your product has got gaps in it, but you have a world class customer service, you can probably paper over the cracks. You can probably get by with some workflow that's not really optimal, right? But only for so long, and vice versa, right? If your product is absolutely superb, but your customer service isn't, you'll probably get by for a while, right? Until your customer's CEO encounters a problem, and then he or she will not put up with bad customer service, right? We've all experienced that, where a senior person comes in and just cancels the entire contract, right? Because the service wasn't there, right? So, but I do think that if you go back to the net promoter score, everyone understands that, right? It's a very simple mechanism. There is a degree of science in it, and people can get quite complicated about it. They can have multiple cohorts and target multiple segments of different users, which I think is fair if you have a lot of them, hundreds of thousands of them. And therefore, you're not looking at your customer base as one homogenous group of customers. There's different dynamics going on here. And so you need to understand that. So I think that's important. Likewise, there are people who go too far with NPS. And if it drops by 2 or 3 points, it's the worst thing in the world, and the whole world is going to fall apart, which it won't, right? And again, there is a science behind it. Now, I have to admit that I was never a fan of it, because I just thought it was just too blunt, right? Um, but I guess recently I've seen, I guess, its power to some extent, right? So, but we saw at Poppulo, because of the nature of what we do, of internal communications, right? That our NPS score went up by about 20% in February, end of February, early March, just when companies were having to communicate at a pace never seen before with their employees, right? So we saw the NPS score go way, way up, right? There was no big product release, so we knew it wasn't that. And it was simply because our product did what it's supposed to do, which was to communicate. And all of a sudden, I think a lot of our customers forgot about all the little things that are driving them crazy every day, sort of some of the features and so on, some of the workflow. No, we need to get the email out. We need to communicate by mobile to all our employees. So it did what it's supposed to do. And so um, and now what we've seen is that it sort of dropped it just a little bit, but now it's actually stayed up. But the other thing as well is that with the NPS, as I alluded to earlier on, is you got to close the loop, right? And what I mean by that is, so we solicit 1,000 um, NPS surveys every single month. It's just on a rolling basis, right? And so every single detractor gets contacted by the CSM, right? And we also then go back to people and I won't say challenge their responses, but let's take a response. Um, uh, your product doesn't do this, a particular work workflow. And I think it's really important to get back to that customer and say, no, it doesn't do that workflow. Um, uh, but why do you want that workflow? And so straight away you can have that conversation. The other conversation, of course, is that the customer says, oh, I didn't mean to give you a 0, I meant to give you a 10. Now we're still trying to figure out how some people can not press 10 as opposed to 0, but that's probably a different matter. But again, I think it's really important that you close the loop. I remember reading years ago that, I think it was Hertz Rent-A-Car, I know it was Enterprise, that they only contacted the customers that gave them a 10. Now, and I get that philosophy, I get that. Let's only talk to the ones that give us a 10 so we can learn why they're giving us a 10. And so I do like that concept. Um, I'm just not brave enough to ignore the the ones who give us a zero, right? Because particularly if they're in a large customer. And I just to finish off on that point, the other the other thing I would say is that if you have a customer that has 1,000, let's go back to my earlier example, 1,000 users of your product, asking one person out of 1,000 every 6 months because maybe you want to have a rota, right? Um, I'm not sure that's the best thing to do. What we've done in the past, and what I've done in other in previous companies, where we've worked with the customer and said, "Can we work together to poll all your end users as one specific cohort?" So that way we get the NPS score inside a single customer. And I think that's an important strategy to try sometimes, right? And to work with the customer. And that's very important. Do not ask 1,000 end users in one single customer respond to an NPS without asking the permission of the customer. I've seen people recommend this, and I think it's a really crazy thing to do because you don't know that your customer contact doesn't want you to do that because they want to have the control of their relationship and so on and so on. So I think look, it just, if I could possibly summarize that, I'd say that how you measure it from a quantitative from a qualitative point of view depends upon what your strategy is. If you're high touch or you're low touch, then maybe you're all three. Maybe you're tech touch, medium touch, and you're high touch. In which case, have a differentiated feedback mechanism for each of those different types of relationships, because are different ways in which you will engage with customers. Because typically, what drives us to put customers into different categories, such as high, medium, and low or tech, is based upon the ARR every year, right? So how much money they spend with us. And so the lower you go down, probably the less strategic your product is. It's more functional, it's more transactional. Whereas the higher up you go, the more strategic it is. And so NPS, I don't think it loses its value as you go up that particular chain.
Absolutely. And I think NPS is also easy to measure. So it makes things easier for the company also to take care of. So, moving to our next question, Peter. One of the worst things to say to a customer is the word no, but it is unavoidable at times. So, how does this impact customer success, and how can we turn this bad situation into a positive one?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, like, I think no is one of the most powerful, positive things you could ever say to a customer in certain circumstances, right? Um, and I, I delivered a couple of talks on this recently, which is, and it was quite provocative in this title. I want to fire a customer. Um, now, that, even just sort of thinking that and saying that, is enough to get your employment contract terminated in most companies, right? You can't fire a customer. Well, okay, no, you don't want to, right? But let's just sort of challenge our position, and we say, okay, we must never say no to a customer. And I completely disagree. I think you should never be afraid to say no. It does depend upon what the question is, right? Obviously. So let's use common sense here. It depends upon what the question is. The most common one that we would get working with customers, particularly with software, is, and if you think about it, every single customer that we deal with is not the same. Everyone thinks that if I sell my product into two different customers, that they're going to use and think about my product in the same way. And they won't, because every company has a different way of doing things. If you think about our own companies where we work, and then we join some other company, we're going to go, whoa, they really do things differently here. In my last company, we did it this way. So when we think about it, when a customer uses our software, by and large, right, We're imposing workflow on them. They have to follow the workflow that we've put in to our product. They have to follow the logic. So, but that's not how they may have used that workflow in the past. So the first thing that they're going to, one of the first things they will say to us, we'd like this feature done this way. And as customer success people, as customer centric people, we're programmed absolutely. That's a great idea. I'll bring that back to product and we put it into the list of feature requests. Okay? Now, that's called the black hole, right? Because if you imagine how many customers you have, right? Now, if you only have 5 customers, then fair enough. If you've got 10,000 customers, you've got 1,000 customers, and every month at least one of them asks for some kind of feature request, then you're going to have a lot of feature requests in your ProdPad or in your Jira or whatever system you're actually using, right? And there's no way your engineering department is going to get to them. How many people work in a software company whereby they have an infinite engineering resource? You don't. What's the most expensive part of software, of running a software company? It's not the sales, not in terms of the return. In terms of it's the engineering. Getting good engineers is really difficult, right? And they're very expensive. So there's only so much the company can actually do. So if a customer, I take the stance, if a customer says, we'd like it to do this, and you say, okay, the first thing is why. It's not yes, it's why. So don't just say yes straight away. Say, walk me through why you need that and what's the outcome. So what's different about you than the other 999 customers that don't want it, right? So straight away, you're displaying empathy, you're displaying understanding, and you're starting the challenge, right? Because maybe there's a different way. Because the customer could be coming at it from this point of view that maybe there's something downstream or upstream to that process that they're talking about that you can alter. Actually, did you know that if you actually started your process over here, then you don't have to do that, right? Okay. But this comes back to my earlier points about understanding the customer industry, right? And what the dynamics are and what's going on in that company, right? So this is where everything all ties back, right? So so now what you can do is you can say, so what do most of us do? Most of us say, as I said earlier on, I'll take that back to our product manager and I'll get back to you. Now, what you've now done is what the customer hears. It wasn't what you said. What the customer hears, we're going to put that into our roadmap. Okay? And so the customer who has the memory of an elephant, right? Well, in 6 months' time, when the renewal is coming in and you're talking about it, they'll say, you know, we're not really happy because we asked you about this feature 6 months ago. You never came back to us. And then we'll say, oh, well, no, we decided that we weren't going to do that. Now the customer feels let down because, as far as they were concerned, you walked out of the building smiling and saying, yep, we're going to bring this back to product management. It's going to be great. We're going to have a great time. Life is wonderful. Right? Boom. But so I think that there was I was talking to somebody else recently, and we're talking about customer feedback loops, right? And having that difficult conversation with your customer. And so here's my solution. My solution is to say no in that scenario. So you go back to product management and you say, look, company XYZ, they've asked for this particular feature. Product management would then say, oh, okay. Then they go to engineering who love solving problems. They're engineers. What software developer doesn't, oh no, I don't want to do any coding today. No, they love something new. They love a challenge. And they'll go off and they'll come back and say, it's going to take 3 months to do this particular feature. No one has asked the question how much money the customer's paying now. Okay, so no one's asked the question. right? And so product would then go, well, we've got all this sort of things to do, and my OKRs and my bonuses depend upon getting these things out. So that feature gets kicked into touch. The CSM hasn't either doesn't know this or doesn't check up on it. So here's the solution, right? You create a criteria, right? So you create a pod of your customer success manager, your product manager, and someone from engineering, right? Those three people at a minimum look at the annual value of that customer contract. They look at the strategic roadmap that the company has, not the customer, but your software company has, where we're going, what we're trying to do. Is there how best of a fit is this? And how long is it going to take? So, but we need to be, so what that gives you is a prioritization of what features you will do and what features you won't do. So if your average customers ARR is 50,000 a year, and what I mean by that is that you got some customers paying you 20,000 a year and some customers paying you 500,000 a year, right? Let's just take a typical sort of range. If a customer comes in at 10,000 a year and wants 3 months worth of engineering, you don't do it. Now, have you got the strength of character, coming back to culture, to go back to that customer and saying no? But don't go back and say no. Say, can I explain to you why we're not doing it? And tell them, just be absolutely honest. Look, you don't say you're only paying us 10,000 a year and that's why we're not doing it. No. What you say to them is that, look, we're aiming for this. This is where we're going as a company. We only have a finite amount of engineering resources. Now, let me show you the roadmap. My earlier point, everyone loves the roadmap. Let me show you the roadmap. Let me show you where we're going. So, by not doing this for you, enables us to get here quicker. And if this is where you want us to go as your valued partner, then we will get there quicker. Now, if that customer says, no, no, if you don't give me that feature, I will churn. Then you then say two things. One, goodbye. Two is now if 50% of your book of business is made up of these customers, then I suggest you do that feature. But you've already made that decision earlier on, right? If we have enough customers asking for this feature, then obviously you're going to have a look at that from a revenue point of view or a retention point of view. But what I'm saying is that for those customers who are coming in with outlier feature requests, if you're never going to do it, tell them immediately you're not going to do it. Don't say that. Don't take the easy way out and say, well, we're not doing it this quarter, but we might do it next quarter. So don't kick the can, right? Be brave and be strong, right? But tell them something else. Offer them something else. Look, we're not doing that feature, but what if we gave you this? What if we gave you 13 months for the price of 12 at your next renewal? What if we gave you an extra day of services? What if we gave you this little upgrade feature here, which will help you over here? So just think out of the box, but just say it's okay. Long-winded answer here, but just it's okay to say no. So just be brave, and most of all, most of all, just make sure your line manager knows that you're going to say no. Okay, so don't be a hero. Don't be a hero, right? So that's important.
Absolutely, and I think the ways that you listed down are some really really smart ways that people these managers can avoid such situations, and it's going to be really insightful for our audiences. So, before we wind up with the interview, Peter, any thoughts that you would like to share with the audience?
Look, the only thing I would say is I can share lots of thoughts as you can probably as you've now witnessed, but I would say to anyone is just network, 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 right? And that's one of the reasons why we founded Customer Success Network. It's a not-for-profit community, and I learn every day from talking to people, right? And it's listening to webinars, doing conferences, um, but most important, just networking with your peers, because we all work. If you're working in the software sector, there's very few software companies that are on a strategy of, you know, winding down. There's very few software companies that are saying we're not going to grow. We have no growth ambitions, right? Every software company is growing. So what that means is that if you think about the two things that you, as a leader or as a person working in a software company, people and process are the two things that typically drive us crazy, right? And they're the two things we have to constantly work on as we scale. Our people we either need new people, we need our existing people to have new new skills. So what new skills do I need? So what I find great is just reaching out to somebody who's already gone through that journey, and you ask them, walk me through what you went through, because I might be able to take some of what that person went through and apply it to where I'm going, as opposed to make it up myself, right? Wait for one or two things not to work. So just by talking to multiple people, you can get multiple views, and you can bring that back to the table in your own company and say, I spoke to 4 companies, and this is where they went. Now, these are the lessons that they learned, and these are the things we need to watch out for. On the process side, also that's equally true, right? So um, process is it's a difficult thing, and not everyone embraces process, right? By and large, okay. When we think about process, we think about lack of speed. We think about filling in forms. We think about, well, no, process can be real fun, right? And it's this whole thing about, you know, as you scale, it's identifying what processes are working. How do we make them robust? How do we keep them safe? But and here's the paradox: but how do we also know when they need to change? At what stage do we need to change? So that whole complex area. So being able to reach out to a peer, being able to reach out to somebody else who's been there before, and get them. Okay, now my earlier example. Show me your customer listening framework. Okay, here it is, right? And now straight away you can now see how I can apply this process to where I'm going. Because there, customer success, and I'm going to finish up with this. Customer success to me is a management practice. It's not new anymore. It's not special. Stop saying it's special, because special means it's an experiment. It's, you know, is finance special? No. Is marketing special? No. Is sales special? No. Well, customer success is not special anymore. So we need to just get over that, right? Um, but it's a management practice, and that means it's about people, it's about process, it's about systems, it's about, you know, it's those 3 things: people, process, systems, right? And that's what we need to do. And just, yeah, so take that view and network like crazy. Talk to your peers. Talk to your peers.
Absolutely, Peter. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Your insights were really, really valuable, and I know our audience is going to enjoy this interview.
Okay, great to see you again, Shandani, and hopefully see you soon.
Same here, Peter. So we'll
Bye
be
bye.
back with a new episode and a whole new expert soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one. Thank you.